Have you ever made a target that looks like this? Have you ever tried to use this helpful tool to diagnose your shooting problems? Fret no more. All of that is behind us. We're going to work on best practices for shooting accurately today. First things first, we want to make sure we're seeing what we're supposed to see. If you are using iron sights, you are going to see rear sights closest to you and a front sight on the front of the gun. When we line these sights up, we want to make sure we have equal height, so the up and down direction, and equal light on each side of that front sight post. So instead of like this or like this, we want to line it up perfectly in the center with equal height and equal light. If you're using an optic, it's a little bit different because instead of having two things that you have to line up together, you only have one dot that has to appear between your eyes and the target. When we're shooting iron sights, we have the option of closing our non-dominant eye and looking through our sights, or keeping both of our eyes open and focusing on our target. With an optic, we're always going to keep both of our eyes open. Once we confirmed that your accuracy issue isn't related to what you're seeing in your sights, we're going to talk next about making sure we're holding the gun correctly. The first thing I'm going to do when I pick up my firearm is ensure my finger is in a high position, far away from the trigger guard or the trigger. Next, I'm going to make sure my dominant hand is as high and as tight as it can be against this beaver tail right here. My goal is to get my hand as high as I possibly can to help mitigate recoil. Next, I'm going to use my non-dominant hand, all four fingers nice and tightly closed, and touch the bottom of my trigger guard with my index finger. From here, I'm going to fill in all of this space on the grip with the palm and the meat of my thumb. So that's going to look like this. I have good grip pressure all the way around the grip of the gun, 360 degrees around the grip, and I'm also pressing my support hand very tightly into the gun, as if I'm giving somebody a very firm handshake. With my support hand, I'm going to put all four of my fingers as tight against each other as I can, and then I'm going to touch the bottom of the trigger guard with my index finger and roll my palm and the meat of my thumb against the gun in an attempt to cover all of the space around the grip. If my hands are too small for the gun that I'm using, it's possible that a little bit of the grip will be showing, but as much as possible, we want to get both of our hands to touch each other around the gun and not have any portion of the grip exposed. Quick tip, if you're using a small gun, instead of gripping it the way I explained for the other size guns, there's a little bit of a trick I use. I flag my dominant hand thumb up to open up just a little space behind the back strap. Then I'll take my non-dominant hand and try to get a small sliver of my palm behind the grip of the gun. This allows me to feel like I'm a little bit more in control of the recoil of the gun. So my non-dominant hand palm is actually partially behind the gun. Then I continue building the grip from there, dropping my dominant hand thumb on top of my non-dominant hand thumb. There's a lot of different thoughts out there about grip pressures and grip tension and which hand should be doing how much work. I'm going to try to simplify that as much as possible by saying that your hands and the size of your gun are going to indicate how much grip pressure you need and in which hand you need that pressure. For me, most of the guns that I shoot allow me to use my dominant hand in a front to back pressure motion and my non-dominant hand almost just crushing whatever I can. So my left hand is very regularly crushing into the fingers of my dominant hand. I am using as much grip pressure as I possibly can with that support hand to help mitigate the recoil of the gun. If you think the gun is recoiling in your hands an unusual amount, ask somebody that you know that's a good shooter to demonstrate on your hand how much grip pressure they use with their non-dominant hand. The way I like my students to do this is hold the gun in their dominant hand and then I'll come next to them and squeeze my non-dominant hand the same way I do when I'm shooting my own gun. That way they can feel the amount of grip pressure that I'm using, and almost always my students say, I was not doing that. That can be a huge difference in how much recoil you feel in the gun. Now we're going to talk briefly about stance. I'm a right-handed shooter, and I like to shoot with my right foot a little bit behind my left foot, about shoulder width or hip width apart. I bend my knees just slightly, I pivot forward at my hips, and I engage my core so that my whole upper body is pretty immovable. I want my arms to extend almost all the way, but not straight elbows, and I'm going to shoot in that athletic stance so that the recoil isn't pushing me backwards. If none of these things were your issue, you're like, yeah, I know how to align my sights, I know how to grip my gun, and I know how to stand when I'm shooting, then the last thing we're gonna focus on might be your issue. That is trigger press. When we are pressing the trigger on a gun, there is a portion of the trigger press that is very easy to do. This is called the slack of the trigger. The slack of the trigger can be pressed as quickly as you'd like. Does not matter how fast you press that. As soon as you get to the wall of the trigger, it's going to get significantly harder to press the trigger. This is where we need to use care and attention and ensure that our sights are staying aligned with our target the whole way through that trigger press. I think about pressing the trigger like pressing the brakes in a car. I'm not going to slam on the brakes as hard as I can. I'm going to ease on the brakes until the car stops. When I'm thinking about easing on the trigger, I'm not talking about this easy part, the slack. I'm talking about once you find the wall of the trigger, now ease through that trigger press until you hear the click. All right, now we're gonna put it all together. I'm going to get a solid two-handed grip with my trigger finger nice and high away from the trigger, establish where I want my feet to be, engage my core, bend my knees, press out towards my target, finding my front sight perfect through the rear sights. Then I'm going to touch the trigger and gently press through that wall. My goal is to keep the gun as still as I possibly can throughout that trigger press. So when I extend the gun, I'm going to find that front sight perfect through the rear sight. I'm going to touch the trigger and I'm just going to take out the slack. When I take out the slack, it's possible that my front sight moved a little bit. So I'm going to realign my sights perfectly before I continue that trigger press. Now I'm going to smoothly press through that wall until the shot breaks. Hopefully these tips and tricks helped. But if you're still struggling, there is no substitute to personal, private coaching and instruction. Look for a local chapter of A Girl and a Gun near you by going to agirlandagun.org or find your local Rangemaster certified instructor.